The Yamaha R6 was introduced in 1999 as a carbureted motorcycle. It was then updated in 2003 to include fuel injection. The same bike was manufactured from 2003 to 2009 but was known as the R6S after 2006. It's considered to be the more streetable version of the R6. In truth, it's just the older bike with a newer model year designation. It's still raceable in the novice classes, fast as all hell, nimble, and easy enough to work on even for the layman. If I had to guess, there are tens of thousands of these bikes out there in people's garages. Many of them were bought and stored after scaring the hell out of their new owners. Despite being common as dirt, they command a premium on the used market because of their overwhelming popularity. Even the less desirable S models we're talking about here command a premium. Even the carbureted bikes are considered an option for the newbie rider who just has to have an R6. With that said, I'd caution against trying to resurrect any one of the carbureted bikes unless it happens to be in really good condition or you really know what you're doing with respect to tackling unreasonable projects. Many of the electronically fuel-injected bikes made in and after 2003 are still in great shape and represent good value on the used market. What I'd caution against is accepting nothing less than an R6 for your first bike. Many new riders get it into their heads that they just have to have an R6 for one reason or another. They've heard about the race heritage. Maybe they've watched it happen on the internet. Maybe their racer friend tells them that there's nothing better than an R6, even on the street. Never mind the fact that these bikes make 40 foot-pounds of torque tops on the high end and they rev to the moon, making them in reality slow as fuck on the street unless they're wrapped up and traveling at warp speed. Most newer riders would be better served with an SB650 on the street, but there's a certain species of noob who just has to have an R6 even if he or she has never thrown a leg over a motorcycle before. When you combine this, call it desire for an R6 with a limited budget, all kinds of shenanigans are likely to have taken place. I've seen some really bad R6s, I've seen some really bad R6Ss. And by the way, the R6S is known colloquially as the second generation R6. I've met more than a handful of people who've had the unfortunate experience of having had to pay way too much for a second or third generation R6. And I'm talking about bikes that cost $2,500 that needed brakes, brake lines, tires, and bodywork before they'll ever be able to be considered a complete motorcycle. Some of them didn't even run all that well. You're catching up with me now as I replace the rear master cylinder on this ratty old second generation Yamaha R6. The process is, well, it's simple enough. I start by loosening up the master cylinder and the right side rear set. Then I swing the entire assembly around and loosen up the banjo bolt holding the brake line to the old master cylinder. The next step is to replace the old master cylinder with the new one. So just loosen up its fasteners completely, remove the banjo bolt holding the brake line onto the master cylinder, and then reverse the steps and get ready to bleed the rear brake on this bad boy. It's a good idea to use a pair of brand new copper or aluminum crush washers on the banjo bolt for the brake line that goes into the master cylinder. I'm not sure why these master cylinders tend to break over time. I think the seals they lose their integrity over the years and over the miles. And especially if you store these bikes outside and don't use them very much, I've found that the rear master cylinders tend to get where you either have to bleed them all the time or you have to replace it in order to make the rear brake work the way that it should. For this job, you might have noticed that I bolted the master cylinder up and the rear sets up just to kind of see where the brake line fell to make sure that it fell in exactly the right spot where it should. And it did. So you can see it hanging there. It's just hanging out there. I'm going to have to remove the rear set assembly completely from the bike again in order to tighten up this banjo bolt with a pair of brand new aluminum crush washers placed between it and the rear master cylinder. While we're zoomed in here, you can see me tightening up the banjo bolt. I'm just getting it hand tight before I remove the rear set and tighten it all the way using a ratchet, and I think it's a 6mm Allen key, but don't quote me on that. So the used master cylinder that I bought on eBay came with its own reservoir that actually looked like it was a little bit newer than the old reservoir that came off of this bike. However, it was slightly like the wrong shape, and I didn't like the shape, nor did I like the way that it hit the hoses. So I am replacing it. We're going to go ahead and remove the little clip that holds it on and then slide it off of the hose. You can see the hose there, it's empty. There's no more master cylinder reservoir on it. We're going to replace that with the old one. The old one actually fits properly, even though it's a little bit weathered, it's a little bit worn. I think as long as the current owner is gentle on it, it won't break or do anything stupid. Plus it's going to have brand new brake fluid in it, and you can also, I went ahead and I removed the entire brake hose there. So we're going to go ahead and either fit a new brake hose or we're going to use the one that's on there. There we go. Now we're using the old brake hose with the old master cylinder reservoir. This is going to work and fit a lot better than the quote-unquote new stuff that came with the used parts that I ordered off of eBay for this bike. So as of right now, everything is still loose, so I'm going to go ahead and unbolt the right rear set here, and then we're going to tighten up the banjo bolt after I expose it. After I've tightened up the banjo bolt, and by the way, I'm using new aluminum crush washers on this banjo bolt because we don't want it popping loose or doing anything stupid or leaking while the owner is riding it. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up using a ratchet. I have the rear set kind of wedged between my body and the swing arm of the bike. I'm not too concerned about the finish on this bike's swing arm. It's pretty tore up, so if I add an extra scratch there from the rear set where I'm tightening up the banjo bolt, then so be it. I really don't care. So the very last step of doing this job, and this is a ratty old bike, so I'm not being nearly as careful as I would be if this was a newer bike. If it was a newer bike, I might use an impact or something to get the banjo bolt out. I might also replace the banjo bolt with something that I can tighten from the side, like an actual 14mm banjo bolt instead of these factory Yamaha ones. Anyway, it is finally time to bleed the rear brake on this thing. So you can see I have a syringe hooked up to the rear brake, and then, well, I have a syringe hooked up to the nipple on the rear brake caliper. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill up the brake caliper or brake fluid, the rear brake master cylinder reservoir. Man, there's so many words to keep track of when describing what's happening in these videos. It's kind of crazy. I get tongue-tied a lot of the time and I have to start over, so just bear with me. So I've filled it, and now I'm trying to pump fluid from the rear end of the syringe. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the syringe and see if I can't pump a little bit of fluid. Now I'm going to loosen up the nipple a little bit more and see if it'll start pumping now. There we go. We've got a little teeny tiny bit coming out. So I'm going to use the syringe to hold the line down, and then I'm going to keep filling the master cylinder reservoir with brake fluid until we've got it nice and full and I think all of the air bubbles have been worked loose. Sometimes if brakes want to be really stubborn, I'll have to put fluid in the syringe and then pump the fluid in from the back. A lot of the time you can watch all of the air bubbles come up through the master cylinder reservoir when you do that. So now we're just going to switch views to, you can see it pumping nicely. Every time I hit the rear brake, it's pumping a lot of fluid, it's moving fluid, it's building pressure like it should. All of that's good. We didn't actually need the syringe. We did not need to pump it in from the back. We just pumped it in through the reservoir, and the system filled up and appears to be working properly. So now we're nearing the end of this job. It's a pretty easy job replacing a master cylinder. I just wanted to take you all the way through it. You know, you can see my syringe, you can see my hose that I run into the nipple, you can see how I refill this master cylinder reservoir. I'm going ahead and I'm filling it with some DOT4 fluid, making sure that it's all the way full, and then replacing the master cylinder reservoir where it goes. It uses a little number 3 Phillips to hold it onto a piece of the bodywork on the back. So with that, we are done. Thank you so much for watching.